Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in again. I am Katie Batesman, the Content Director at SheCanCode, and in today's episode we're discussing why London isn't the only place for good tech talent. While London remains the top destination for tech talent in the UK, there are so many exciting opportunities to be found in other areas of the country. With the tech industry crying out for more talent, we're delving into why organisations should be casting their nets outside of the capital. So I've got the wonderful Clare Loveridge, Vice President and General Manager EMEA at Arctic Wolf with me today to discuss this topic further. Welcome, Clare. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And this is a topic we haven't had on here before. We talk about tech talent all the time, but we haven't actually spoke about location and the importance of going a little bit further than London and why it's important for businesses to look further afield. So we're going to dive into that in a second. But to start, can we hear a little bit about your background, how you got into tech and a little bit about your path so far?
Absolutely. So I would love to say that getting into tech was planned and that I went to university and I studied all things tech, but I absolutely didn't. So I went to university and I studied languages with European studies. And I actually thought or hoped that I would go and get to work somewhere in Europe, somewhere within the European Commission or the European Parliament, whatever that would be. But actually, I did my degree because I loved languages, not because I had any career aspirations at that time, which I think's quite normal for a lot of people these days, particularly at the age of 18, who really knows what they want to do, unless you're in a profession like, you want to be a doctor or you want to go into law or a particular profession. I think there's a lot of people at that age just don't really know what they want to do. And I was a key example of that. So I finished university and we decided that we'd stay in Portsmouth, which is where I studied, for the summer and just have a final hurrah. But I didn't have funds at that time, so I needed a job. And I actually got into transport and logistics because they needed somebody that was trilingual. So that's where I started. And it was just a summer job, but I actually ended up staying there around 7 years. And that's where my career really started. So I started in import export, and then that progressed on to a couple of roles that got me into sales. And it was at that point that I realized that I really, enjoyed working with people. I liked the thrill of the sale. I liked being out and about and meeting different people. And I thought, actually, this is what I want to do. But because I'd started in that role on something like £8,000 a year at that time and stayed, they could never pay me the same as they paid my peers, which I think is quite, I've heard a lot of people that have stayed in their original jobs or their first jobs that have got to that point. And the company actually said to me, to pay you the right amount, you're going to have to leave and come back. That's the only way we can put you on the salary that you deserve. So, or that is the salary for this job. So I thought, well, I'm obviously going to leave, but I didn't quite know to do what. And I knew somebody that worked for a startup based in High Wycombe, and I got an interview and I got the job. And it was a total shock to the system because I knew nothing about IT. I knew nothing about the tech industry. It was completely green and I was the only salesperson. So I learned everything. I learned about working with the reseller channel. I learned about direct sales. I did an inside sales job. I was basically given a phone book and told to go and find some customers, which is what I did. So that's how I landed in tech. And it's such a small industry that first job led to the second job, that led to my next job. And actually the people that you meet along the way, there's so many great people in tech that helps you to move from job to advance your career. And I'm lucky enough still to work with some people that I worked with in that first job in tech. But I've made so many great relationships in this industry that that's what helps you to move on and find new opportunities in many respects.
But I love the fact that you said you joined a tech job and you had no tech background, and it's great. It's always great to hear that. I think people find the industry very intimidating from the outside, and they think I have to have tech qualifications and a tech background. Actually, you just described your first job. They sounded very open to the fact that they just wanted somebody who obviously had experience in work, and you must have had a lot of transferable skills coming over to the tech industry that they probably saw as an advantage, and just let you train up in the other areas that they needed you to.
Completely. And we very often say, particularly in roles like sales roles, if you find a good salesperson, they could sell anything from sand to the Arabs through to, coffee in Colombia. They can, if a good salesperson has the people skills and the transferable skills to move from industry to industry. For me, it's more about understanding what's out there, what the opportunity is, and going after it. I think the tech industry, like you say, people think that you have to be really technical and you have to have studied IT or computer sciences or some sort of tech degree, but you don't. You come into an organization like Arctic Wolf, obviously there are parts of the job and opportunities that offer for real technical people with technical skills in security, in infrastructure, in networking, that you need to have that background for. But in many jobs, you can come in and we can teach you, if you've got the drive and the enthusiasm and the desire to be successful and the desire to achieve something, and you understand what the opportunity is, we can teach you in many different roles, and we can either start or advance your career. And that's really what I would like people to understand, that if you understand that there are opportunities within IT, go after them, because it's a great sector to work in. But I think you're absolutely right. There is a common misconception that you have to have a technical background to come into IT. There are a lot of roles in IT that you don't need that technical background for.
Yes, definitely. And today our conversation is talking about the different types of locations that you can go for tech jobs. I mean, it ties in with what you just said on the shortage of tech talent, and being more encouraging for companies to invite more people in with the right mindset, the right skills, and not necessarily the correct tech skills, but also now we can say that companies are casting their net slightly further afield to look for talent outside of the city. And I think a lot of that obviously changed with the pandemic, and that was changing slowly, but it changed quite dramatically with the pandemic. Is that something you'd agree with, that the pandemic had an effect on people searching for tech jobs outside of the capital?
I think it's had an impact on people searching for all sorts of jobs outside the capital. When I left school, everybody thought that to have a career, you'd have to move down south. And that's exactly what I did. I went down to Portsmouth, I studied there, but then I stayed in the south for over 20 years until I got to a position where I realized that actually you can have, or I knew enough about it to know that you could have a role. And at the time that I moved back, and we'll talk about this a bit later, I had a job that meant that as long as I was close to a train station or an airport, it was fine, because I traveled so much. But I think the impact of the pandemic has been huge. So if we look back to, in a previous role, I had an inside sales team and we had an office in London, and the expectation always was you would come into London, and it was an office-based job because you feed from each other, and you need that office environment to do a job like that, because it's really tough. So there was never any question about people coming into the office. When I started with Arctic Wolf to look for the same sort of role, at that time I thought I was going to put my office in London. This was before we made the decision to put the office in Newcastle. And we started the hiring process, and the answers that I got blew me away. So I found, not just new graduates or people out of university, not just necessarily with tech background, or people in other parts of the career. And I'd say to them, it's an office-based job. We're planning to put the office in London. The answer I got back was, this is the salary I want, which was the equivalent of London salary. So this is the salary I want. This is my expectation, but I'm not coming into the office. And I would say, well, why not? Well, I'm not traveling into London every day. I'm not going to get the train, and I'm not going to commute, and I'm not going to pay London prices to have a job. So if you want me to do this job, then it will be remote. And I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't believe the answers that I got, because you always expect London to be the place that you can hire easily for an office type environment because you'll have the talent there. But I could not, people withdrew from the applications because it was an office in London job. And I think there's an awful lot of people that do not want to work in the city anymore, that don't want the commute, they don't want to lose the time, and who've realized after the pandemic that actually work-life, home-life balance is key and quality of life is key. So when we decided to launch the EMEA head office in Newcastle, I can't tell you how many people got in touch with me saying, I've read your story, I want to do the same as you did, I want to move back to the north. Do you know of any opportunities, or can you tell me more about what you did and how you did it? Because the expectation is that to have that career, you'd need to be in the south. But when people started understanding that, you know, as a multi-billion-dollar company, we've just opened our headquarters in Newcastle, it was like, you've done what? Why would you do that? But why not? The question is, why not? And I think the amount of people that now want to have the life or be close to family and not have that distance away from their roots or whatever reason it may be, I think the pandemic has changed that massively. And I've got enough emails to prove that as well. It's been fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yes, and as you said, I mean, yourself, you picked jobs where you felt you had to be near a train station and an airport. And even the people that, you know, at the time of the pandemic, people were thinking, I can move out of the city, I don't have to live as close to the city. And they made, you know, real location decisions to move away from expensive rents or house prices, away from the city. And like you said, they're not planning on going back. And it's amazing because I remember that there was a report last year from Accenture. It was called the Tech Talent Tracker, and I think it pointed out the fact that there are still a high number of tech professionals in London, and that's where you'll find most of the tech professionals, but it only grew 2% year on year, whereas Manchester grew 25% year on year. It's just insane that up north, suddenly everybody realized, you know, I can be remote, or I can have the option to now go to an office, for instance, in the north, and check in with my colleagues once or twice a week, and not have to come down to London. It's been such a change for everybody, and it's as you said, I think it depends on the person as well, doesn't it? If you're somebody that likes to be in the office 5 times a week, fair enough. You might, you know, live in an environment that you want to leave the house every day and you want that routine and you still want to commute. But it is nice now to have the choice. And as you said, a lot of people are now thinking, I wouldn't take up a job if it required me to be in a certain amount of days in London. And that's something that I've done, and it's very expensive and the prices are still going up, and, you know, all of those things that you contend with working in the city. I mean, there are obviously a lot of benefits to individuals and their work-life balance. That there are also benefits to organisations, aren't there, relocating or opening offices in other areas of the UK, and, you know, not paying London rents, for instance. I mean, that's a big one, isn't it?
Huge. I was fortunate enough that the budget, when we were looking at office spaces, wasn't a driver. The culture was the driver. And that's what I was really focused on, building the culture that we want as an organisation. Because a lot of people talk about culture, and it's a slide on a slide deck about the importance of culture, but at Arctic Wolf, it really is important. So I was more concerned about having people in the office to build that culture than I was necessarily about rent. But you're absolutely right. For many organisations that want to open a big, thriving office, the costs in London are restrictive, shall we say. So when we first started looking, I honestly thought that because it was straight after the pandemic, I thought in rents, there'll be so much office space that rents will be a lot lower, so it could be a great time. But I was wrong. They weren't really any different at all compared to the cost of being up north. And as well as that, you know, having people in cities that want to come into the office is a lot easier, and to create that buzzing environment. When you look at London, how many people have that after work relationship where they'll go out for some dinner, they'll have some drinks because they've always got a train to catch? We don't have that problem here because being in Newcastle, we can pop out for lunch together, we can go somewhere after work, and everybody's maybe maximum half an hour from the office. So it doesn't make it difficult to create those out of work relationships as well. So for me, the key driver was culture.
Yes, definitely. And I love the fact that the way that you phrase that, it's not just a slide in a slide deck. It's absolutely true. And I think a lot of companies, I've heard it before on here. Somebody described it as it's not just a Slack channel, especially with women in tech, think, oh, we create a Slack channel and we've cracked it there. But you're right, the culture is more about how you feel at work, and whether or not it translates from the slide deck through to how you feel every day. And there are only certain companies where that actually translates, and where their employees feel comfortable with what they do, and that they can continue to grow in the right company. What can companies do to attract tech talent away from London, do you think? So
this is something I've actually put quite a lot of thought into, and I was presenting on a panel quite recently where we spoke about, what are the challenges with having an office, particularly in Newcastle. You touched on Manchester. There's been a lot of focus put on Manchester. Manchester is a tech hub now, but it's also a big city for many different industries. But as you look at tech, you've got, people in London, you've got a lot of organizations in Manchester. Cambridge is quite big in tech. Leeds has become a focus for tech. Newcastle, not so much so, but you would be surprised at how many organizations are moving into Newcastle. So the panel that I was on, we were talking about exactly that. How do we drive more talent to Newcastle? How do we drive more talent outside of London into the north? And it struck me as I was talking to my stepdaughter that one of the areas that I think we're really missing is education into schools. If we don't tell children as they're thinking about their career or going through their exam choices of the opportunities that you can have in many different sectors, in many different cities, then they won't know about it. And they'll either be like me and they'll end up leaving, and we don't want our talent to leave. And equally with universities, we're surrounded by universities here. We've got Newcastle, Northumbria, we've got Durham, Sunderland, Teesside, Edinburgh just up the road. We want to bring that talent in. But before I touch on universities, educating in the school system is absolutely key, I think, to give people or to give children the foresight of the opportunities that there are in the careers that they can start at, and not only start, but continue. You don't have to leave the Northeast anymore. You don't have to leave the North to have a great career. And I think that's the starting point. When I asked my stepdaughter this same question, who's 15, and I said to her, what's your career advice look like? What do they talk about? And she said, well, they talk about, going into nursing or going in to be a teacher. Those were the two key things, mostly public sector related. And I said to her, did they touch on the private sector? Did they touch on the growing industries that are moving into the Northeast? Did they touch on tech at all? She said, not at all. So with that, it made me realize that maybe we're missing a trick here. And if we start earlier on, we can guide people to tech roles in the Northeast and help them to understand that they don't have to leave. But equally in the universities, we have so much talent in the universities locally that we need to drive that talent to stay in the Northeast. But again, that's by awareness. And we realize that actually there is growing awareness of the tech sector in the North, but I think we can do a lot better by shouting loudly across the whole region to what sort of organizations are putting their head offices here, what sort of organizations are even opening offices and recruiting here. And I think that's a part that we're missing. It's all around the education.
Yes, definitely. At SheCanCode, we're a big advocate for you can't be what you can't see. And we hear it often that a lot of ladies fall into tech. We hear that often because all it would have taken was somebody coming in and giving a talk at your stepdaughter's school, and just being at a careers fair and somebody just highlighting the great career that is available in technology, and that you don't have to leave the North or wherever it is that you may live. And it just takes one person. I've had several guests on here say, I was at a careers fair, and I just happened to bump into somebody that that pointed me in the direction of technology, and just that moment kind of changed that lady's career path entirely. But as you said, if school is talking about completely different career routes, all valid career choices, but it's nice to have somebody come in and talk about, as you said, the up and coming sectors as well, to then be able to decide which one is for you. I think as well, you're correct in people not just knowing the opportunities available to them, but not always knowing as well that the world isn't centered around London. And I remember having that feeling. I left the city in 2015. I didn't leave for the pandemic, but I joined a company where, when I interviewed with the lady, we met at London Liverpool Street, and we chatted, and it turned out that she lives only down the road from me in Essex, and she said, well, our offices are only down the road from where I live, but we'd met at London Liverpool Street because we assumed everybody works around London and that's where we're going to need to meet. But it turned out we were right near each other. So obviously I never thought I would have a local job, and that was when I left the city, because it doesn't cross your mind, does it, that you would have opportunities near where you live. So my mindset changed from that point on, because I started to think, oh, I don't have to commute anymore. This is great. So when the pandemic came around and everyone else was thinking, I don't want to commute anymore, I was thinking, well, I've had some years of this so far. So yeah, you don't always realize, do you? You don't even look locally. That's
No.
the thing. That's where you always put London in the job search and don't even think of looking local.
No, and that's a shame, really. We do need to look broader. It's a misconception that you have to be in, a big city to have a job. You don't. You absolutely don't. But you have to look for it as well. A lot of it's awareness, like we've said, changing impressions of different cities. I think we've all got impressions of certain cities. Newcastle's got an impression of lots of hen do's and stag do's and a great night out, which I wouldn't argue with. It is a great night out. But it's changing that impression to take it from the conception to reality, and how the world has changed.
Yes, definitely. I must say that with Newcastle, I have been through it on the train, and as I went through, there were lots of girls and guys that are all, having a great time within the train station, and I thought exactly that. And I think people have the same feeling when they come through train stations in Essex. They get exactly what they think they're going to get. Always good to see. Do you think, though, the refocus from the capital, do you think it will help diversity in tech and kind of solve that problem? Because you were mentioning about commute earlier. There must be a lot of ladies, and not just ladies, but parents, for instance, who are thinking, I don't now have to tag on a commute. That's really going to help women in tech, for instance, think, actually I can go for a role that I probably wouldn't have normally have gone for.
Absolutely. You've got the flexibility now. You've got the flexibility in many places for hybrid working from home or office working. I'm a big advocate of being in the office, but also totally accept that you've got hybrid working. And people do need flexibility to fit in around their lives. And I'm absolutely fine with that, because I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about diversity lately and growing a business and culture, because it really is key for me. And I think the whole people first strategy, as I put it, if you give people what they need in terms of training, tools, flexibility, culture, work-life balance, everything else will follow. And I think if you can do that and allow people the flexibility to fit their roles to a degree around the job that they need to do, then you get a lot better performance out of people. And I think that's hugely important. And it's the way the world's going. We have to. We don't clock in and clock out with a piece of cardboard every day that I remember in my first job. We're just not that regimented. I also think there's a large degree as well, though, that during the pandemic, because people were at home, for people working remotely, they ended up working an awful lot more hours than they were expected to.
Yeah.
So I think that work-life balance and being flexible is absolutely key. when I first started in tech, I was one of very few women in any organization. I worked for a large company at one time, and it was all suits. You'd call it the suits because it was all men, and there may have been a handful of us women around. And somebody pointed it out to me quite recently, and I hadn't even noticed. But if you come into the office, or you even look at the leadership team here, an awful lot of them are women, and it wasn't by design. So there's myself that heads up EMEA, there's the head of customer success, the head of the SDR team, recruitment, HR. There are so many females that have come into the organization, the head of marketing from EMEA, not just at heads of roles, but in many different roles. So there are ladies across every department in the company. And it was only when somebody pointed out that I thought, actually, that's so different to when I started. I don't know whether it's the Northeast. I think it's probably across all companies geographically now. But I do think having that flexibility to be close to home without having to have that commute will encourage further DEI. And that's key for organizations moving forward. We have to do it. And it's the right thing to do.
Yes, definitely. And you're right. I think some companies try harder than others and notice that being more diverse, has a lot of benefits to it. And, I'm sure as you grew as a company and you were seeing the benefits of having more women in leadership, kind of just continued across the board. And I think so. You saying about, flexibility within a company, I'm assuming as well that your employees are quite loyal because of that, because you're quite trusting of your employees, then they stick around. I'm assuming that a lot of those ladies, they've been there some time, and and it's a career that you go into and think, I'm going to stay here for a while, rather than just people sort of coming and going every 1 to 2 years because they're trusted.
Absolutely. And I hope so. So to give you an idea of where this came from at Arctic Wolf, and the thinking actually came from the US. So we started off as a Silicon Valley business, and Silicon Valley is very transitory. If you want another job, you can go next door and get another job, because it's where all of the tech companies are. So there was very little loyalty. And, if somebody came along with a better offer, very often you would take it. The commute into Silicon Valley is hard. It's expensive. San Francisco and all of that area is incredibly expensive. So I consider that a little bit like London, quite a lot like London in actual fact. And Arctic Wolf many years ago moved the head office to Minnesota. So, and back then it was kind of news, Arctic Wolves moved their headquarters to Minnesota, which wasn't known as a tech hub at the time. And what they got from then was exactly what we're talking about. They got loyalty, they got long tenure. So our churn of staff is incredibly low, because people can build their lives close to the office. And we also have an awful lot of women, not just in leadership, but across the entire organization. And they did that without thinking that was what they were trying to achieve. They did that to move away from Silicon Valley, and for several other reasons, but the results of it were absolutely key. So when the CEO asked me why I was going to move the office to London, I said, well, that's where you're expected to have your office, whether that's in the centre of London, down the M4 corridor. And he said to me, but Claire, you don't live in London. And I said, well, no, I don't. And he said, well, put the office where you are. He said, how can you build the culture of the company where you are? How can you build the culture of the company like we want you to do if you aren't going to be in the office every day? And we all kind of stood there and thought, well, why not? Why not put the office in Newcastle? Why are we thinking about putting the office in London? And without the design of thinking about that, focusing more on culture, what we're talking about has happened. So we've got loyal staff, we've got a lot more women, we've got the culture that we want. All of that has come by opening the office here, but that wasn't by design. It's happened. So I think if you look at following what they did in the US and us doing it here, I think there's some key pointers to take from that.
Yes, definitely. Just being more mindful and not just, people just going with what they know and opening another office in another part of London, or they think they've really gone further afield because they've gone, you know, North London to South London. That's about it.
It's on a different tube line.
That's it. Do you think there will come a time when London isn't a hub for tech talent in the UK?
I'm not completely sure. I think it's always going to be a hub. It's our capital city. You know, there's always going to be finance, I would say, in the capital city. There's always going to be tech in the capital city. The airports have a lot more routes. There's a lot of advantages for many organizations being in the capital, but that doesn't mean that you can't have tech hubs in other places as well. And there's still people that live in the south that want to be in London or that live close to London. So as the capital city and the biggest population, I think we're always going to have a hub there for many industries, but I think we can have hubs elsewhere as well. We don't have to have one main hub and very small micro dot hubs elsewhere. I think we can create more Manchesters.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, which is beneficial for everybody working in the industry. And you know, the industry as well, it changes so incredibly fast. And anything that we can do to help people within it, obviously, even, you know, where you work and how you work, obviously has a massive effect. But we're almost out of time, and I wanted to ask you about the industry changing incredibly fast. You work in one very, very fast-paced industry in security, but I wanted to ask you, do you have any thoughts or predictions for the tech industry in the UK and where it's going to go?
So, you know, so I've worked in many different parts of tech. I've worked in backup. I started in security, in wireless security. I've worked in storage, and now I'm in cybersecurity. And it does change, you know, with the invention of the cloud, as an example. We moved away from having all of your data centers on site to putting them in the cloud, and they became this buzzword of the cloud, and the cloud has grown. It's not going to stop growing. You know, the cloud is really important. The security industry is incredibly interesting because breaches and these bad actors, as we call them, just get cleverer. They find different ways to attack organizations. That's not going to change. I think security is going to continue becoming more and more and more important to organizations because data is key. And for organizations to be under threat or to have downtime, to lose their business means losing customers. I think security is going to become more and more of a focus, whereas in the past you could buy some products to fix point problems. Security is becoming a really, really big thing. So I think cloud and security, and then you look at all of these things like artificial intelligence. IT and tech are getting really clever. You know, we can't, it advances, it progresses. Tech's never going to go away. I think our days of not having a mobile phone are gone. Our days of not doing anything on a laptop are gone. The data lake that you have is just going to continue to grow. And with that comes more and more problems that you have to fix. So the tech industry as a whole is going to continue to grow, which means that there's more opportunities, which is great. Are you going to see challenges in certain parts of the industry? Of course you are. You are in any part of the industry. But I think security and cloud are going to continue to be a really big focus in tech.
Yes, definitely. And I think we need more people like you who just describe the tech industry as you described it there, going into schools and talking to more young people, you know, about the careers in it, because as you just described, what sounded like a very fast-paced and fun and constantly changing and challenging industry. And as we spoke about earlier, it's just making sure that more young people know that.
Absolutely. And it is a great career. You know, once you're in tech, you don't have to stay in security and you don't have to stay in one part of tech. There is mobility within the tech industry because it is so vast. And there's tech in every country of the world, so you can have geographic mobility. There are so many opportunities in tech. You don't have to be a techie geek, as we call them. You don't have to be that person. There are so many other routes into technology. I had no experience in tech. I had no knowledge of tech. When they spoke to me about running a channel, I thought that was the body of water between the UK and France. So the learning curve you go on it's a big learning curve. I'm not going to pretend it's not. but it's always a learning curve. As tech continues to evolve, that just brings more opportunities. And for me, it's a great industry to get into, and it's an industry that constantly evolves, that constantly has new opportunities. And, you know, I would wholly recommend that if people are interested, to just go for it. You may be like me and land in tech, but if you fancy giving it a go, give it a try.
Lovely. That is a lovely advice to end it on, because we're already out of time and the conversation has flown by, because it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us today, and sharing your insights. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thanks ever so much for having me.
Thank you. For everybody joining us, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.